Maya Johnson adjusted her blazer one final time before stepping into the gleaming conference room on the 42nd floor of Sterling Financial Tower. The 24-year-old legal analyst had been with the company for barely 8 months, but her sharp mind and attention to detail had already earned her a reputation among her peers. Today, however, she found herself in uncharted territory. The merger deal between Sterling Financial and Apex Holdings was the biggest transaction the company had seen in decades. Worth over $3 billion, it would reshape the entire financial landscape of the region. Maya had been assigned to the legal review team, a position that surprised many of her colleagues who assumed such high-stakes work would go to more senior staff. As she entered the room, the atmosphere felt charged with tension and anticipation. Around the massive mahogany table sat some of the most powerful people in the industry. CEO Richard Blackstone commanded attention from the head of the table, his silver hair perfectly styled, and his expensive suit radiating authority. He had built Sterling Financial from a small investment firm into a financial empire over the past 20 years. Beside him sat Victoria Chen, the chief legal officer, whose stern expression suggested she was already calculating potential risks. The other attendees included senior vice presidents, department heads, and external consultants who had been brought in specifically for this deal. Maya noticed she was not only the youngest person in the room, but also one of only 3 women present. The presentation began with Blackstone outlining the strategic benefits of the merger. His voice carried confidence as he described how the combined entity would dominate market share and create unprecedented opportunities for growth. Charts and graphs filled the large screen, showing projected revenues, cost savings, and market expansion possibilities. Maya listened intently, following along with her copy of the merger agreement. Her legal training had taught her to read every word carefully, to question assumptions, and to look for potential problems that others might miss. As Blackstone continued his presentation, something in Section 4.7 of the agreement caught her attention. The clause dealt with employee retention and severance packages following the merger. On the surface, it appeared straightforward, promising fair treatment for all employees during the transition period. However, as Maya read more carefully, she noticed subtle language that seemed to create different standards for different categories of employees. Her heart began to race as she realized the implications. The clause contained what appeared to be discriminatory language that could disproportionately affect certain groups of employees. The wording was clever, buried within legal terminology that made it difficult to spot unless someone was looking specifically for such issues. Maya glanced around the room, wondering if anyone else had noticed the problematic language. The other attendees seemed focused on the financial projections and market analysis being presented. She felt a knot forming in her stomach as she considered her options. Speaking up would mean challenging not just the contract language, but potentially the entire deal that everyone seemed excited about. She was the most junior person in the room, questioning work that had been reviewed by teams of expensive lawyers and consultants. The merger had been months in the making, and pointing out a fundamental flaw now would cause significant delays and complications. But staying silent felt impossible. Maya had not worked this hard to build her career just to ignore serious legal issues when she encountered them. Her grandmother had always told her that doing the right thing was rarely easy, but it was always necessary. As Blackstone moved through his presentation, Maya found herself barely listening to his words. Instead, she was mentally rehearsing how she might raise her concerns. She knew she had to be diplomatic but firm, professional but clear about the severity of the issue she had identified. The room fell silent as Blackstone concluded his remarks and asked if there were any questions or concerns about the merger terms. This was the moment Maya had been dreading and anticipating simultaneously. Several senior executives asked technical questions about integration timelines and regulatory approvals, but no one mentioned the problematic clause she had discovered. Maya felt her palms growing sweaty as she weighed her decision. She could feel her career hanging in the balance, knowing that challenging such a high-profile deal could have serious consequences for her future at the company. At the same time, she understood that allowing discriminatory language to remain in the contract would be far worse than any personal repercussions she might face. The silence stretched on as Blackstone looked around the room with satisfaction. Clearly pleased with how smoothly the presentation had gone, his confident smile suggested he believed the deal would proceed without any significant obstacles. Maya realized that if she was going to speak up, it had to be now. Taking a deep breath, she slowly raised her hand. The gesture felt both natural and terrifying, as if she was simultaneously doing exactly what she was supposed to do and making the biggest mistake of her career. Blackstone's eyes settled on her, his expression showing mild surprise that the youngest person in the room had something to contribute. Maya cleared her throat softly and prepared to speak the words that would change everything. She had no way of knowing that her next sentence would not only challenge the merger terms, but would also set in motion a series of events that would test her integrity, courage, and determination in ways she never could have imagined. Maya felt every eye in the room turn toward her as she prepared to speak. The weight of the moment pressed down on her shoulders, but she forced herself to maintain steady eye contact with CEO Blackstone. Her voice came out clearer and more confident than she had expected. "Pardon me, but this clause is misleading," Maya said, holding up the merger document and pointing to section 4.7. The language here appears to create different standards for employee treatment that could be legally problematic. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Blackstone's confident smile vanished completely, replaced by a look of confusion and growing irritation. The room, which had been filled with the comfortable murmur of a successful presentation, fell into dead silence. Maya could hear the air conditioning humming and the distant sound of traffic far below. Victoria Chen, the chief legal officer, leaned forward with sharp interest. Her expression suggested both concern about Maya's claim and annoyance that a junior analyst was questioning work that her entire legal team had presumably reviewed and approved. "I'm sorry," Blackstone said, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there moments before. "Could you be more specific about what you think you've found?" Maya's hands trembled slightly as she stood up, but her voice remained steady. She had committed to this course of action, and there was no backing down now. Section 4.7 discusses employee retention and severance packages. However, the language creates what appears to be a two-tier system that could disproportionately impact certain groups of employees based on their tenure, department, and salary level. She walked to the presentation screen, her heels clicking on the polished floor. Maya had not been invited to present, but she felt compelled to explain her findings clearly. If you look at subsection C, it states that employees with less than 5 years of tenure will receive standard severance packages, while those with more tenure receive enhanced packages. On the surface, this seems reasonable. Blackstone's jaw tightened as Maya continued. He was clearly not accustomed to being challenged, especially by someone so junior in the organization. Several other executives exchanged glances, unsure whether to support their CEO or listen to Maya's concerns. However, Maya continued, pointing to specific language in the document, when you cross-reference this with subsection F, which deals with department classifications, and subsection H, which addresses salary thresholds, a pattern emerges. The combination of these requirements effectively excludes a disproportionate number of employees from minority backgrounds and women, who statistically tend to have shorter tenure in senior positions and may be concentrated in certain departments. The room erupted in whispers and uncomfortable shifting. Victoria Chen was furiously flipping through her copy of the contract, clearly trying to verify Maya's claims. Two of the external consultants began whispering urgently to each other, their expressions growing increasingly concerned. "That's a very serious accusation," Blackstone said, his voice now cold and controlled. "Are you suggesting that our legal team, our consultants, and our partners have somehow overlooked discriminatory language in a $3 billion merger agreement?" Maya felt the full force of his displeasure, but she pressed on. "I'm not making accusations about anyone's intentions. I'm simply pointing out that the combined effect of these clauses could create legal liability under employment discrimination laws. The language might not have been intended to be discriminatory, but impact matters as much as intent in legal terms." One of the senior vice presidents, a man named Robert Hayes, spoke up. "Even if there's some merit to this concern, surely we can address it with minor revisions. We don't need to derail the entire timeline over language technicalities." Maya shook her head. "With respect, this isn't a technicality. If this language remains in the final agreement, it could expose both companies to significant legal challenges. Employees who feel they've been unfairly treated could file discrimination lawsuits, and regulatory agencies might scrutinize the merger more closely." The tension in the room continued to build. Maya could see that some attendees were beginning to take her concerns seriously, while others appeared angry about the disruption she was causing. Blackstone's expression had moved beyond irritation to something approaching fury. "Ms. Johnson," he said, using her name for the first time during the meeting. "You've been with this company for less than a year. Do you really believe you're in a position to second-guess decisions made by teams of experienced professionals?" The question was clearly designed to put Maya in her place, to remind everyone in the room of her junior status and relative inexperience. She felt the sting of his words, but also recognized the attempt to dismiss her concerns based on her position rather than addressing the substance of her findings. "My tenure at the company doesn't change what the contract language says," Maya replied calmly. "I understand this creates complications for the timeline and the deal structure, but ignoring potential legal issues won't make them disappear." Victoria Chen finally looked up from her frantic review of the documents. Her face was pale, and Maya could see recognition in her eyes. The chief legal officer had found the problematic language and understood its implications. "Richard," Victoria said quietly, "I think we need to table this discussion and conduct a more thorough review of these sections." But Blackstone was not ready to concede. His investment in the deal, both financial and personal, was enormous. The merger was meant to be the crowning achievement of his career, and having it questioned by the most junior person in the room was clearly intolerable. "I think we're getting ahead of ourselves," he said dismissively. "One person's interpretation of contract language doesn't constitute a crisis. We have deadlines to meet and commitments to honor." Maya realized that despite the validity of her concerns, Blackstone was not willing to listen. The CEO had too much invested in the deal to accept that there might be fundamental problems that required significant delays to address. She was facing a choice between backing down to preserve her career or continuing to press an issue that could protect the company and its employees, but might cost her everything. Maya felt the room's energy shift as Blackstone's dismissive response hung in the air. She could see Victoria Chen still studying the contract with growing concern, but the chief legal officer seemed reluctant to directly contradict the CEO in front of the entire merger team. The other executives appeared torn between their loyalty to Blackstone and their growing awareness that Maya might have uncovered a genuine problem. "Mr. Blackstone," Maya said, choosing her words carefully, "I understand the pressure to move forward with this timeline, but if these issues aren't addressed now, they could create much bigger problems later. The cost of fixing discriminatory language now is minimal compared to the potential cost of lawsuits, regulatory investigations, and damage to both companies' reputations." Robert Hayes shifted uncomfortably in his seat. As the head of human resources, he would bear significant responsibility if employment discrimination issues arose from the merger. "Perhaps we could have our employment law specialist take another look at these specific sections," he suggested tentatively. Blackstone's eyes flashed with irritation. "We've already had multiple legal reviews. We've paid consulting firms hundreds of thousands of dollars to ensure this agreement is solid. I'm not going to delay a $3 billion deal because one junior analyst thinks she's found something that teams of experienced lawyers missed." The words stung, but Maya recognized them as an attempt to undermine her credibility rather than address her substantive concerns. She had expected this type of response, but experiencing it firsthand was more difficult than she had anticipated. "The language is there in black and white," Maya said, her voice remaining calm despite her racing heart. "I can walk through it line by line if that would be helpful. The discriminatory impact may not have been intentional, but it's demonstrably present in the current language." Dr. Sarah Williams, one of the external consultants who specialized in regulatory compliance, spoke up for the first time. "If there's even a possibility of discriminatory language, we should examine it closely. The regulatory environment has become increasingly strict about employment practices in mergers and acquisitions." Maya felt a surge of gratitude toward Dr. Williams, whose support gave her concerns additional legitimacy. However, she could see that Blackstone was growing increasingly frustrated with the direction of the conversation. "I've heard enough," Blackstone declared, standing up abruptly. "This meeting was called to finalize details and move forward with signing. We're not going to derail months of work based on one person's overly cautious interpretation of standard contract language." Victoria Chen looked up from her documents, her expression troubled. "Richard, I think Maya has raised some valid points that we need to examine more carefully. Section 4.7 does contain language that could be interpreted as creating disparate impact on protected groups. The admission from the chief legal officer created a visible stir in the room. If Victoria was confirming Maya's concerns, it meant the issues were real and potentially serious. Blackstone's face reddened as he realized that his attempt to dismiss Maya's findings was being undermined by his own legal team. "Victoria," he said sharply, "are you telling me that your entire legal department failed to catch supposedly obvious problems in this contract?" The question put Victoria in an impossible position. Admitting that her team had missed important issues would be professionally damaging. But denying the problems Maya had identified would be dishonest and potentially legally dangerous. "The language is subtle," Victoria replied carefully. "It requires looking at multiple sections together to see the full impact. Maya's analysis appears to be correct, and we need to address these concerns before proceeding." Maya watched the power dynamics play out around the table. Blackstone was clearly furious that his authority was being challenged. But he was also beginning to realize that the legal issues might be genuine. The external consultants were whispering among themselves, likely calculating the potential liability exposure. "Fine," Blackstone said through gritted teeth. "If we must waste time on this, let's do it quickly. I want a full legal review completed by tomorrow morning. And I want recommendations for minimal changes that won't affect the deal structure or timeline." Maya knew this was not the thorough review that was needed, but it was more than she had hoped for when she first raised her concerns. However, she also understood that Blackstone's frustration with her specifically was only growing stronger. "Mr. Blackstone," she said, "I want to emphasize that my goal is to protect both companies from potential legal problems. I understand this creates complications, but addressing these issues now is much better than facing lawsuits later." "Your goal," Blackstone replied coldly, "seems to be disrupting a carefully planned process based on your limited understanding of complex business transactions." The personal attack was clear, and Maya felt the sting of his words. Around the table, she could see various reactions from the other attendees. Some looked uncomfortable with Blackstone's harsh response, while others seemed to agree with his assessment of her as an overly cautious junior employee. Dr. Williams spoke up again, her voice measured and professional. "In my experience, the employees who ask difficult questions often save companies from expensive mistakes. The cost of addressing potential discrimination issues now is minimal compared to the cost of defending against lawsuits later." Maya appreciated the support, but she could see that Blackstone was done listening to anyone who disagreed with his position. His mind was made up that she was being disruptive and overly cautious, and no amount of evidence was likely to change his opinion. "This meeting is adjourned," Blackstone announced abruptly. "Victoria, I want your team to do whatever quick review is necessary to address these supposed concerns. Everyone else, we're proceeding with the original timeline unless legal comes back with something that actually threatens the deal." As people began gathering their materials and filing out of the conference room, Maya felt both relief and apprehension. She had succeeded in getting the legal issues reviewed, but she had also made a powerful enemy in the process. Blackstone's hostility toward her was unmistakable, and she knew there would be consequences for challenging him so publicly. As the conference room emptied, Maya gathered her papers with trembling hands. The adrenaline from the confrontation was beginning to wear off, replaced by a growing awareness of what she had just done. She had challenged the CEO of her company in front of the most senior executives, disrupting a $3 billion deal that had been months in the making. Victoria Chen approached her as the last of the other attendees filed out. The chief legal officer's expression was unreadable, a mixture of concern and something that might have been respect. "Maya," Victoria said quietly, "I need you to walk me through your analysis, step by step. If you're right about this, we have a serious problem that needs immediate attention." Over the next hour, Maya and Victoria worked through the contract language together. Maya showed how the various subsections, when combined, created what employment lawyers would recognize as a disparate impact on protected groups. Victoria's expertise allowed her to immediately understand the legal implications and potential liability exposure. "You're absolutely right," Victoria admitted, her voice heavy with concern. "This language could expose both companies to discrimination lawsuits and regulatory scrutiny. I can't believe our review team missed this." Maya felt vindicated but also worried about the backlash she was likely to face. "What happens now?" she asked. Now we fix it, Victoria replied firmly. Regardless of what Richard wants, we can't proceed with language that creates this kind of legal risk. I'll need you to prepare a detailed memorandum documenting the issues and proposed solutions. As Maya worked late into the evening preparing her analysis, she received a text message from her friend and colleague, James Martinez, who worked in the marketing department. Heard you stirred things up in the big merger meeting today. Everything okay? Word was already spreading through the company about her confrontation with Blackstone. Maya knew that by tomorrow, everyone would know that the young legal analyst had challenged the CEO and disrupted the biggest deal in the company's history. The next morning brought swift consequences. Maya arrived at her office to find an email summoning her to a meeting with Human Resources. Robert Hayes, who had been in the merger meeting, wanted to discuss her approach to raising concerns in high-level meetings. The HR meeting was uncomfortable but not as bad as Maya had feared. Hayes was clearly trying to balance Blackstone's anger with the reality that Maya had identified genuine legal problems. In the future, he told her, concerns about major deals should be raised through proper channels before presenting to senior leadership. Maya understood the message. She was being told that challenging the CEO publicly had been inappropriate, regardless of whether her concerns were valid. The company needed to maintain hierarchy and protocol, even when important issues were at stake. Later that afternoon, Victoria called Maya to her office with an update. I've completed the full legal review with our employment law specialists, she said. Your analysis was correct on all counts. The contract language creates clear, disparate impact issues that must be addressed before we can proceed. Maya felt relief that her concerns had been validated, but Victoria's expression suggested there were complications ahead. Richard is not happy, Victoria continued. He feels that you embarrassed him in front of the merger team, and he's questioning whether you have the judgment and discretion needed for high-level legal work. The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She had done exactly what she was trained to do as a legal analyst, identifying potential problems and bringing them to the attention of decision-makers. But her reward was having her judgment and discretion questioned by the very person whose deal she had helped protect from legal liability. What does this mean for my position? Maya asked, though she dreaded the answer. For now, you're being reassigned to routine contract review work, Victoria replied. Richard wants you off the merger team and away from any high-profile deals. Maya felt her career aspirations crumbling. The merger work had been her opportunity to prove herself and advance within the company. Being relegated to routine work was effectively a demotion, a signal to everyone that challenging senior leadership came with serious consequences. Victoria, Maya said, I did what I thought was right. I identified serious legal problems that could have cost the company millions in lawsuits and regulatory penalties. I know, Victoria replied sympathetically, and from a legal perspective, you did excellent work. But Richard sees it differently. He believes you should have raised your concerns privately rather than disrupting the meeting. Maya understood the politics behind Blackstone's reaction, but she struggled with the injustice of being punished for doing her job effectively. She had prevented potential discrimination against employees and protected both companies from legal liability. Yet she was being treated as if she had done something wrong. That evening, Maya sat in her small apartment, staring at the city lights and wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. Her phone buzzed with messages from colleagues expressing both support and concern. Some admired her courage in standing up to Blackstone, while others warned her about the career consequences of challenging powerful executives. Her grandmother called, as she did every week, asking about work and life in the big city. Maya found herself telling the whole story, from her discovery of the discriminatory language to the confrontation with Blackstone and the subsequent reassignment. Baby, her grandmother said in her warm, steady voice, you did the right thing. Sometimes doing right costs us something, but that doesn't make it wrong. You protected people who couldn't protect themselves, and that matters more than any job. Maya felt tears welling up as she listened to her grandmother's words. She knew her grandmother was right, but the professional consequences felt overwhelming. Her dream of building a successful legal career seemed to be slipping away because she had been too honest and too principled. As she prepared for bed, Maya reflected on the impossible position she found herself in. She had succeeded in getting the discriminatory language removed from the merger agreement, protecting countless employees from unfair treatment. But her reward was professional exile, and a damaged reputation within the company. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as she navigated the aftermath of her decision to speak truth to power. Maya realized that her real test was just beginning. 3 weeks after the merger meeting, Maya had settled into her new routine of reviewing standard contracts and routine legal documents. The work was mind-numbing compared to the complex merger negotiations she had been involved in, but she tried to maintain her professionalism and attention to detail. However, the isolation was taking its toll. Her former colleagues on the merger team had grown distant, either out of fear of being associated with someone who had fallen from Blackstone's favor, or because they genuinely believed she had overstepped her bounds. Maya found herself eating lunch alone most days, watching through the glass walls of the conference rooms where important meetings continued without her. The merger itself had proceeded after a 2-week delay to address the discriminatory language Maya had identified. Victoria Chen had worked with external employment law specialists to rewrite the problematic sections, ensuring fair treatment for all employees regardless of their background or tenure. The revised agreement had been praised by regulatory agencies and employment rights organizations, but none of this vindication reached Blackstone, who continued to view Maya as someone who had embarrassed him and disrupted his carefully planned timeline. Her reassignment had sent a clear message throughout the company about the consequences of challenging senior leadership, even when that challenge proved to be correct. Maya's phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon as she was reviewing a routine licensing agreement. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but when she answered, she heard a familiar voice. "Ms. Johnson, this is Dr. Sarah Williams. We met at the merger meeting a few weeks ago. I was one of the external consultants." Maya remembered Dr. Williams as one of the few people who had supported her concerns during the confrontation with Blackstone. "Hello, Dr. Williams, how can I help you? I was wondering if you might have time for coffee this afternoon. There's something I'd like to discuss with you about your career prospects. Curious and hopeful for any positive development." Maya agreed to meet Dr. Williams at a coffee shop near Sterling Financial Tower. When she arrived, she found the consultant waiting at a quiet corner table, looking professional but approachable. "Maya," Dr. Williams began after they had ordered, "I've been thinking about what happened in that merger meeting, and I wanted you to know that your analysis was exceptional. You identified issues that teams of expensive lawyers had missed, and you had the courage to speak up despite the obvious risks." Maya felt a surge of gratitude at hearing these words from someone she respected. "Thank you. It's been a difficult few weeks professionally speaking." Dr. Williams nodded sympathetically. "I can imagine. But I want you to know that not everyone sees what you did as a mistake. In fact, I've been talking to some colleagues about you, and there might be opportunities available if you're interested." Maya's heart began to race. After weeks of professional isolation and routine work, the possibility of new opportunities felt like a lifeline. "I run a consulting firm that specializes in employment law and regulatory compliance for major corporations," Dr. Williams continued. "We help companies navigate complex legal issues, particularly around mergers, acquisitions, and employment practices. Your ability to spot problems that others miss, combined with your courage to raise difficult questions, are exactly the qualities we need." The offer was both exciting and terrifying. Leaving Sterling Financial would mean admitting defeat in some ways, acknowledging that challenging Blackstone had indeed damaged her prospects at the company. But it would also mean escaping the professional isolation she currently faced. The position would involve significant travel and challenging work, Dr. Williams explained. "You'd be reviewing major corporate transactions, identifying potential legal issues, and presenting your findings to senior executives at some of the largest companies in the country. It's exactly the kind of high-level legal work you were doing on the merger team, but with greater independence and respect for your expertise." Maya felt excitement building as Dr. Williams described the role. It sounded like everything she had hoped her career at Sterling Financial would become, but with the freedom to speak honestly about legal issues without fear of political repercussions. "There is one thing you should know," Dr. Williams added. "Richard Blackstone has significant influence in this industry, and he's not been quiet about his opinion of your judgment and discretion. Some potential clients might be hesitant to work with someone he's criticized." Maya's heart sank slightly. Even if she left Sterling Financial, Blackstone's influence could continue to impact her career prospects. The unfairness of being blacklisted for doing her job correctly felt overwhelming, but Dr. Williams wasn't finished. However, there are also executives and companies who see what you did differently. They recognize that you prevented Sterling Financial from making a costly legal mistake, even though it required challenging powerful people. Those are the kinds of clients we work with. Companies that value legal expertise over corporate politics. As they talked through the details of the potential position, Maya realized this opportunity might actually be better than staying at Sterling Financial. She would have the chance to work on major deals across multiple industries, building expertise and reputation based on her legal skills, rather than her ability to navigate internal politics. "I need some time to think about this," Maya told Dr. Williams, though her excitement was evident. "Of course. Take all the time you need. But Maya, I want you to remember something. What you did in that merger meeting wasn't a mistake. It was exactly what a good lawyer should do when faced with serious legal problems. The fact that it created political complications doesn't change the fact that it was the right thing to do." That evening, Maya called her grandmother to discuss the opportunity. Her grandmother listened patiently as Maya explained the job offer and her mixed feelings about leaving Sterling Financial. "Sounds to me like the door the Lord closed wasn't the right one for you anyway," her grandmother said. "Sometimes when we do the right thing, it opens up better paths we couldn't see before." Maya spent the night considering her options. Staying at Sterling Financial meant accepting professional isolation and routine work, hoping that eventually Blackstone would forgive her perceived transgression. Leaving meant taking a risk on a new opportunity, but with the freedom to use her legal skills without political constraints. As she looked out at the city lights, Maya realized that Dr. Williams was right. What she had done in the merger meeting wasn't something to apologize for or hide from. It was evidence of exactly the kind of lawyer she wanted to be, someone who would speak up when she saw problems that could harm people or organizations. 6 months later, Maya stood in another conference room, this time on the 50th floor of a gleaming tower in downtown Chicago. She was wearing a new navy blue suit that represented her growth in both confidence and professional stature since joining Dr. Williams's consulting firm. Across from her sat the executive team of Morrison Industries, a manufacturing giant considering a major acquisition. The transformation in Maya's career had been remarkable. Working with Dr. Williams' firm had exposed her to dozens of complex transactions across multiple industries. She had become an expert at identifying potential legal pitfalls and presenting her findings to senior executives who valued her expertise over corporate politics. "Ms. Johnson," said Patricia Morrison, the company's CEO, "your preliminary review identified several areas of concern in the acquisition agreement. Could you walk us through your findings?" Maya smiled, remembering the terror she had felt the first time she had to challenge powerful executives. Now, speaking truth to power felt natural and necessary. "Certainly. I've identified 3 primary areas where the current language could create significant legal and financial risks for Morrison Industries." As she presented her analysis, Maya noticed the respectful attention of everyone in the room. Unlike her experience with Blackstone, these executives welcomed tough questions and appreciated thorough legal analysis. They understood that identifying problems early was far preferable to dealing with lawsuits and regulatory issues later. During a break in the meeting, Maya checked her phone and found a message from Victoria Chen. The former chief legal officer had left Sterling Financial 3 months earlier to join a prestigious law firm, and she had become one of Maya's strongest professional references. "Saw the article in Legal Business Review about your work on the Harrison merger. Brilliant analysis that saved everyone involved millions in potential liability. Richard should have listened to you from the beginning. Hope you're well." The Harrison merger had been Maya's most high-profile success since leaving Sterling Financial. Her identification of regulatory compliance issues had prevented a deal that would have violated federal antitrust laws, earning praise from industry publications and regulatory agencies. The work had established her reputation as one of the most thorough and reliable legal analysts in the consulting field. Maya's phone buzzed with another message, this time from James Martinez, her former colleague at Sterling Financial. "Coffee next week when you're back in town? Have some interesting news to share." When Maya met James the following week, he brought updates from Sterling Financial that both surprised and vindicated her. "You're not going to believe what's happened since you left," he said. grinning over his coffee. Remember that discriminatory language you caught in the merger agreement? Maya nodded, the memory still vivid despite the months that had passed. Well, it turns out that Apex Holdings had similar problematic language in agreements with two other companies. Those deals went through without anyone catching the issues you identified. Last month, 3 separate employment discrimination lawsuits were filed against companies that had agreed to those terms. Maya felt a chill as she realized how close Sterling Financial had come to facing similar legal challenges. Her intervention in that conference room had prevented what could have been millions of dollars in legal costs and regulatory penalties. That's not all, James continued. The regulatory agencies have started scrutinizing merger agreements much more closely, specifically looking for the kinds of discriminatory language you identified. Your analysis has basically become the template for what they're watching for. Maya felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that her work was protecting employees across multiple industries from unfair treatment. The personal cost she had paid for speaking up had been worth it if it prevented discrimination against countless workers. What about Blackstone? Maya asked, curious about her former antagonist. James' expression grew serious. He's under investigation by the board for several questionable decisions, including his handling of the merger situation. Some board members found out that you had identified real legal problems, and that he tried to proceed anyway. They're not happy about the risks he was willing to take with the company's reputation. 6 months ago, Maya would have felt vindicated by news of Blackstone's troubles. Now she simply felt sad that his ego and unwillingness to listen had created unnecessary problems for everyone involved. That evening, Maya sat in her new apartment, significantly larger and more comfortable than her old place, reviewing files for her next assignment. Her phone rang and she saw her grandmother's number. "How's my lawyer granddaughter doing?" her grandmother asked warmly. "Good, Grandma," Maya replied, settling into her comfortable reading chair. "Really good, actually. I'm working on a case that could help thousands of workers get fair treatment in a major industry merger." "That's my girl," her grandmother said with pride evident in her voice. "You know, I've been thinking about what you went through with that difficult boss of yours. Sometimes the hardest thing about doing right is that people don't always appreciate it at first." Maya nodded, even though her grandmother couldn't see her. "I used to think that if I just worked hard and kept my head down, success would follow naturally. But I learned that sometimes you have to risk everything to protect what matters." "And look where it got you," her grandmother replied. "You're doing work that matters, helping people and building the kind of career you always dreamed of." That man who tried to silence you? He's probably learned by now that pushing away good people has consequences. A week later, Maya received an unexpected call that brought her story full circle. Victoria Chen was on the line with an unusual request. "Maya, I have something sensitive to discuss with you. Sterling Financial is facing some serious regulatory scrutiny over their merger practices, partly due to the issues you identified. The board has asked me to return as an external consultant to review their procedures and recommend changes." Maya listened carefully, wondering where this conversation was heading. "They specifically want you involved in the review," Victoria continued. "Your expertise in identifying discriminatory language and your understanding of Sterling's practices would be invaluable. I know it might be awkward given your history with Richard, but the board is committed to doing this right." The irony was not lost on Maya. The company that had exiled her for identifying legal problems now wanted her back to help fix the very issues she had warned them about. After considering the offer carefully, she agreed to take on the consulting assignment. When Maya walked into Sterling Financial Tower 6 months after leaving, she felt like a completely different person. She wore her confidence like armor, earned through months of successful work and professional recognition. The scared young analyst who had trembled while challenging Blackstone was gone, replaced by a respected legal expert who commanded attention and respect. The final meeting of her consulting engagement took place in the same conference room where she had first challenged the discriminatory merger language. This time, however, she sat at the head of the table as the lead consultant, presenting recommendations to a board of directors that included several new faces. Based on our comprehensive review, Maya concluded her presentation, Sterling Financial needs to implement new procedures for legal review that prioritize thoroughness over speed, and that encourage all team members to raise concerns regardless of their position in the company hierarchy. The board chairman, an elderly man named William Foster, nodded approvingly. Ms. Johnson, your recommendations align perfectly with our commitment to ethical business practices. We're also implementing a new policy that protects employees who identify potential legal or ethical issues from retaliation. As the meeting concluded, Foster approached Maya privately. I want you to know that the board deeply regrets how you were treated when you first raised these concerns. Your courage in speaking up, despite the personal cost, prevented this company from making serious legal and ethical mistakes. Maya felt a sense of closure that she hadn't realized she needed. The validation from Sterling Financial's leadership meant less to her now than it would have months earlier, but it still felt good to have her actions officially recognized as correct and necessary. Walking out of Sterling Financial Tower for the final time, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had learned that doing the right thing often comes with a cost, but that cost is usually temporary while the benefits are lasting. Her willingness to challenge power when she saw injustice had not only advanced her own career but had also protected countless workers from discrimination. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Williams. Excellent work on the Sterling Review. Ready for your next challenge? We just got a call from a Fortune 500 company that needs someone with your expertise to review an international merger. Are you interested? Maya smiled as she typed her response. Absolutely. When do we start? As she walked through the busy streets toward her next adventure, Maya carried with her the knowledge that speaking truth to power, while never easy, was always worth it. She had discovered that real professional success came not from avoiding difficult conversations, but from having the courage to engage in them when justice and integrity were at stake. The young woman who had once trembled while pointing out discriminatory language had become a confident advocate for fairness and legal compliance, proving that sometimes the most important career move is simply doing what's right, regardless of the immediate consequences.